me go back to my Zoom page. And we're live. Hey, we want to welcome you to the June 17th edition of the Wayne Carlen Show.
Hey, I'm Wayne.
And I'm Carlen, and we're here again to give you 30 minutes of life in the world of unity. What do I mean by unity? I mean that we attempt to live in the world of humans, loving them all, sharing with them all, and caring for them all.
Right. So today, we want to address the current issues of the day. And if you've been watching the news, you know Atlanta is on fire right now. Also, there's legislation coming out of Washington on the use of force by police. And many are calling for the defunding of police departments across the nation. We're going to give you our balanced view because here at the Wayne Carlen Show, we do more listening. That's what we try to do, more listening than we do yelling. But first, we're going to begin with a historical reflection on the day around what we know in our country as Juneteenth.
Yes, let's talk about Juneteenth, and it's special for me because I am a Texan, born, raised in the heart of Texas. By the way, I noticed that the University of Texas is talking about getting rid of their theme song, which was Deep in the Heart of Texas, because they said it has some origins and some racist stuff. And so it's just hitting everywhere. So, but to be here in Texas, Juneteenth has definitely a special meaning because June 19th of 1865 was actually the day of liberation when the Union Army sent General Granger and his regiment into Galveston, into the shores of Galveston, and they came to proclaim liberty to the slaves. It amazingly had taken almost 2.5 years before they got that information that Abraham Lincoln had actually freed the slaves on the 1st of January in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. So all that time passed, and then there's a lot of myths and stories out there about why it took so long for them to get the information. And I'm sure there are jokes too about Texas and why it took so long or whatever, but there's a lot of things that some said that the guy who was supposed to bring the message was captured and executed. Some said that they did it intentionally to ensure that the farmers got another harvest of the cotton crop and they needed that free labor on many of the plantations. And so nobody's validated any of those things, but we do know that it took extra time for those people to get the word to get to Texas that the slaves had been emancipated. And so that's what Juneteenth is about. So let's see if we can transition now and let's talk about the events that are going on in our country. Specifically, let's go to ATL.
Yeah, before we go there, I was thinking about something big in the news this week. You know, the president is intending on doing a rally in Tulsa coming up this weekend. So that's something that we can touch base on Juneteenth. It's interesting. But going to ATL, what's been going on? Obviously, everybody's aware of the shooting incident that just occurred recently. The individual that was shot, named Rashard Brooks, young man, had been sleeping in the parking lot of a Wendy's, and police were called. They responded, and it's interesting if you watch the video. The first, few minutes of this interaction was very good. I mean, he was calm and collected. The officers were speaking to him, very calm and collected. Everything seemed to be going well until they got to the point where the officers went to handcuff him. And there's questions about why they were going to do that and all that. But when they went to handcuffing, for some reason, Rashard just felt like he was not going to be handcuffed. Sadly, he's not here to explain to us why. You know, but we can kind of guess maybe recent events in the news. Maybe he knows some people that once they were arrested, something bad happened to him. But for whatever reason, he decided he wasn't going to be handcuffed. And at that point, the struggle ensued. The two officers were trying to hold him down. He was able to get away from them. He was able to get one of their tasers. And once he did that, he took off running. You know, and you guys have all seen it. If you've been watching the news, the officers pursued it. He had one taser, I believe it was in his right hand. He didn't completely turn around, but he turned the taser around and fired it at one of the officers. And the officer took cover. It didn't hit him. He took little cover behind a car, and then he returned fire with his weapon and shot Rashard, I believe it was 3 times in the back, 2 for sure, possibly 3. And of course, Rashard died from his injuries. And so now the debate rages on, was that a justifiable shooting or was it not?
Yeah, and so I think the really big issue is the one that I always bring up, is that we try to treat every circumstance as being the same. And there's so much differentiation in almost every situation because no two incidents are usually the same. And you can make, in some cases, generalizations about types of events, but I think that's where we get into trouble with the events like this, because if you would like to equate this one with George Floyd, then you will not find nearly the unanimous consent on what took place here. And because there are a lot of law enforcement personnel who will defend what the police officers did and say that they should nevertheless be given a fair chance to air their views on this and go to trial. But whereas nobody said anything like that when it came to the George Floyd situation. Right. That was pretty evident. And so I think that's what we've got to do. And one of the things that we try to do here is not only be objective, but understand from everyone's viewpoint. Surely any professional law enforcement people or people even military understand what it really does mean to shoot someone in the back. I mean, that is really, from the time we were kids growing up playing cowboys and Indians, you don't shoot people in the back. That's one of the things that's always been talked about. And so everybody can understand, yeah, that causes some issues. And so a lot to be discussed there and to be talked about. And that's what we think needs to happen. Some of these things, all of these things really need to be talked about in depth so that everyone has an understanding, so that after each event, then we can walk forward understanding the other views. So we have our views, we have other views, we understand those views, and usually the truth of the right view is usually somewhere in the middle there. And I think that's what we try to do at the American Unity Movement, identify that.
And I'll say this, because I do come from a certain viewpoint. In my training, in my 25 years, we were not allowed to shoot what we would call in law enforcement at that time, federal law enforcement, a fleeing felon. We were not allowed to shoot them unless that felon was going towards where he could do bodily harm to somebody. He was running towards somebody and he had a weapon in his hand. He was going to use that weapon. So then it became a judgment call. Or you just witnessed him use that weapon on somebody else and he's running from that. Those are the only exceptions. But if he's just running from you, we weren't allowed. We weren't allowed to do that. But I will say, if Mr. Brooks had turned around, even though he had fired that taser and it no longer could fire at a distance, but if he had turned around and approached the officer with the intent on touching him with that taser, which would then probably render the officer incapacitated, now you're talking about a totally different situation in my viewpoint. So again, those are topics that we can discuss and will be discussed regarding this incident.
Great. Yep, dialogue is always key. We get an understanding, all right? So now let's, all this talk about all these things that are happening, let's go to Seattle. And in Seattle, they have what's called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and they call it CHAZ. And this is a case where it's gone all the way from not just police, defunding of police departments, but them saying we have a police restricted area where we govern ourselves. And the mayor has allowed that. And so we've got a different issue there. So Wayne, what's your view on that?
Well, to me, at this point, that sounds a little crazy to me. Where we could, because you have one group of people who are saying they're just going to do it this way. There's other people who obviously don't agree with that, who are probably in that same zone, either work there or live there. What about those people? So this is something that, I don't want to see it end in bloodshed or anything like that, obviously, but they need to quickly come to some kind of understanding and fix that situation, because that shouldn't be happening. It should be happening in Seattle, and it shouldn't be happening in any city.
And what do you think about generally just the defunding of police departments as a whole? What do you think about that?
Well, I don't. Again, you and I always talk about let's clarify, because some people are saying abolish. I definitely don't agree with abolish. I still believe that we need good police officers. I'm always recruiting. I have 3 of my students who are in law enforcement, and they are all good people. I vouch for them 100%. Then I have fraternity brothers. We have fraternity brothers. I have friends, family members. So I know some people say there's no good police left. I don't agree with that. I think we need good police officers who understand how to police their community properly and build relationships with people in their community. So I don't want to see it abolished. Now, defunding, if that means some of the resources can be taken and used in another area. I hear people now talking about on certain cases, instead of having police respond, having trained I'll just use the term counselors respond instead. So taking out the law enforcement part of it, I'm not opposed to listening to that. That sounds like that could work. Armed police don't have to respond to every issue if it can be handled by some other type of professional. So if that's defunding, yeah, that definitely needs to be discussed and that needs to be looked at. And I would say I can understand that.
Yeah, and I think those are all things that, even whether it's the police force or counselors, that issue of learning to de-escalate is going to be vital to any of these solutions. Because yeah, you can have a social worker show up to when there's a family squabble happening, but I've seen in cases where those things turn violent pretty quickly. I'm not sure a social worker is going to be able to respond to that.
Right.
Are they going to be strapped social workers? So you're and that's going to be the terrible thing. The first time I think a social worker dies in one of those things, a social worker is wounded or killed in one of those things, God forbid. But when that happens, I think people will go, well, maybe you do need somebody here who is showing up with some ability to deter people from such action.
Right.
So it's going to be, it's one of those things. And I think what my point, I think in all this is that whatever we do, that solution is going to have to be worked through and thought through to make sure that we have something that's long-term and enduring. And I think just to arbitrarily say, well, let's just change for the sake of change is not necessarily going to be the answer. So we got to really look through all these things.
Yeah, think about the incident that happened in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago. It was a domestic violence or a domestic disturbance. It was an argument basically between a guy and his girlfriend. Police responded. Now again, his temperature, his mindset, he's way up here and he doesn't want to be taken away. He doesn't want to be arrested. Struggle ensues. He walks away. He ended up getting killed. If that was a social worker and the social worker responds, they're arguing, maybe he'll listen, maybe not. Maybe the social worker just tells her, okay, let's go. If it then becomes violent, yeah, there's a problem. But if not, maybe it's just a solution that people can talk things out. So this is new. This is something that's going to need to be explored, but hopefully, to keep people from getting killed just from starting off at minor incidents, and then they just explode into somebody dying.
Yeah. And so let's turn to some talking. Let's talk about what you think or what we think might be some viable solutions to all this, because there's a lot of talk, there are protests and everybody's got something to say, but how many of those are viable solutions? So I kind of want to talk about that for a second, because we have what we believe are solutions here at Erase Race, the American Unity Movement, and we'll cover those at the end here. But what do you think about solutions? And by the way, we want to send a shout out to you, Brian. Thanks for coming on and to our Facebook Live. If you've got comments, just submit them. And we'll see if we can get those before we close out here in the next few minutes. But what are some of the things that you think are solutions? As we talked about defunding of police departments, is that going to be enough?
No, we definitely need some, you and I always discuss leadership. And so leadership, some of the leaders are struggling with unions, if we're still talking about police, struggling with police unions because they're so powerful and they're so strong. And even though they come in and they want to make some changes, a lot of times they're not able to. So we saw the police chief in Minneapolis just last week said he was trying to break off negotiations with the police union because he wanted to do some things and they just wouldn't allow him to do it. Here in my own city, there was an article written yesterday, and the police union has decided that it was going to sue the city to keep the city from releasing the names of officers that were involved in an unarmed man being shot a couple of weeks ago here in my city. And so the unions are very powerful, very strong. So one of the things that I think needs to be done, I was never part of a union because I was federal, but I know officers like to be part of a union for different reasons, but we really need to look at that relationship between the union and the department and the city. And some things have got to change regarding that. One of the things that needs to change.
And I think across the board, because I think this is a harbinger of things to come in our country. And it's indicative now in the police department, as it were. But I think this happens in many sectors of our society. I don't think this is just an epidemic that's just only affecting police departments. I think it's my view is always it's leadership. It's a leadership issue, because what we have our federal government doing now, reaching down into local police departments and talking about chokeholds, is something that should happen at a much lower level when you've got leadership in place who deals with these things, because this is not something new. These things have been going on now for years. And for the fact that they have not been addressed and appropriately resolved says that the leadership that's been in place has not seen this as a problem. Now, all of a sudden, the leadership sees it as a problem only when the victims and the rest of the American citizens see it as a problem. Leadership leads. Leadership should know ahead of everyone else realizing this is a problem. If you're coming to the party when everybody else realizes it, you're late. You're not a leader anymore. You're one of the followers. You're one of the people, you know? So we got to get leadership. And I think this is true not only in police departments. We're going to start seeing this crop up in other areas. I mean, I think I'm more, I see this more clearly because this was what happened in the United States Marine Corps in the mid 80s and early 90s. We had some issues, definitely specifically racial issues, and we had to deal with them. And then I noticed how we began to get leadership who had to address it really specifically. And once they dealt with it, then there was a sea change. And so, and is any institution we have in our society today free of any of these racial issues? No, but there are some who are addressing it correctly. And I think on behalf of the Marine Corps, I can say that they're doing it definitely better than the rest of America is. And we've made great strides in the Marine Corps.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the military, because one of the other things that has bothered me, and it's bothered me for a little while, is this militarization of local police departments. You know, we all know after 9/11 happened, and after all of the things that went overseas, and I know you were part of that, thank you for your service. A lot of the equipment that you guys had when you were overseas was then given to a lot of police departments. And it was given to them with the understanding that if we ever come under some type of terrorist attack or something, they would have this ability to quell the situation, whatever it was. But what we've seen is, especially recently, is a lot of that equipment, actually going back to Michael Brown and those protests that were happening, we started to see these military apparatus being used on US citizens. And to me, that's sending the wrong statement. We're using military equipment, law enforcement. I know a lot of these guys are former military, and they're probably enjoying putting it on, and it's like taking them back to when they were over there fighting. But now we're using that against US citizens. So one of the things I would like to see change, I'm not necessarily saying they have to get rid of it, but I don't think they should be allowed to use it unless there is some kind of national emergency, some kind of anarchist event where, basically our cities are at war, not against US citizens necessarily, but against, some kind of foreign power, and the military will need backup.
Yeah, I've often thought about that. From the other side, I've often thought about, were they doing that in a case? I remember at one point MS-13 was big, and they talked about the amount of firepower they had compared to what our police departments had. They said MS-13 would come in a city and they've got machine guns, and our policemen are firing those single shots, pistols. And they were outmanned. So I was wondering if some of that was response to that. But I understand what you're definitely saying about, but to use that on our ordinary citizenry, that's probably not appropriate. So,
especially in peaceful protests.
Right. Okay.
So
good dialogue, things to talk about. And so as we talk about that, I want to, bring up this one point before I talk about what kind of solutions we have here at Erase Race and what we offer. And I want to make the point that, of course, at Erase Race, the reason we call ourselves Erase Race is we believe that we have been race conditioned in our society. And so everything stems from race in our society. And that's a big problem because as we know, race is not a real thing. And so everybody then has a different view of what race means to them. And so that thing really compartmentalizes people so that we do have this sense of otherness, and it's them versus us, and it's that color versus this color. And we even take that into our politics, and it becomes liberal versus conservative, Democrats versus Republicans, and everything is this sense of otherness. And that is only furthered by race. And so one of the things we do at Erase Race, we ask ourselves, how is this concept serving us? Because most people will say, but we've got race and it'll be here forever. But we got to ask ourselves the real hard questions. How has it served us in the past? Because we know, if you know where it came from, it was done to create this hierarchy where you had people on the bottom, people on the top. So how has that served us? Has it kept us mired into them versus us atmospherics and them versus us fights on everything that comes up? Do we have that? Do we have an epidemic of that happening in our society? And I would say so. So I would say then race is not serving us well, because this race concept is not just something that happens in our police department, which is what I'm making the point that we think it is now, but it really permeates our social, physical, spiritual, and intellectual areas of all of our lives. We breathe this stuff in. And like I said, we breathe this stuff as so much so it's like, yeah, we would need a mask or grow up in a totally race-free environment not to have that as part of our systems, because we just got race in all up in us. We just have race up in us. So here's what we think we need to do at Erase Races. We've got a plan when we go out, because people don't understand what I mean when I say race. They think I'm saying, let's do colorblind. And so we took something even as inane as colorblindness, and we made that a bad thing, because if you're colorblind, you're a bad person. And so we really got to start some dialogue and understand what people are saying. And we're saying that people are more important than anything else, that the human interaction that we have with each other should matter more than anything else. And so we've got three things that we think need to happen. And that is, we need to connect. Our problem has been that we were segregated because of what happened historically. And that's why the history is important, to understand how we got here. Redlining and the way that the housing segregation stuff happened, and people not being allowed to live in certain places and all that, that created a segregation in itself. And so we had to exist and learn how to exist out with that as a baseline. Once we did that and then laws were changed, we still had ideas that we had to stay that way, because I think the race is so ingrained in us that we still believe that, well, but yeah, we have to live this way. We really don't. I mean, we really don't. And some people choose to do that. Some people don't choose to do that. And in some cases, you still have vestiges of that old system still in place. So it's got to be an intentionality to connect with people that are not like you. And whatever it takes for you to decide, I'm going to venture outside of my area and my people group and engage the other people group. Now, people will say, well, yeah, but we've done that. They didn't do that. And once again, that's the them versus us mentality. If everybody made it their point to do that, we would no longer say them versus us. We would no longer say they're not doing it, but I am. So we believe that we really got to connect, and we've got to become people who understand and begin to ally with simply people, because we're all made in the image of God, and they're people to know. I first got this, of course, in the military, and after going to, especially when I went to Iraq and began to really deal with people, because I was stationed in Japan and some other places around the world. And I never had it to the extent that I had it in Iraq. And that was because when bullets are flying, you'd be amazed at how quickly you can bond. When life and death are at it, like such as now, you'd be amazed at how human everybody gets. We talk about humanized. You'd be amazed at how human everybody gets when life is hanging in the balance. That's what we expressed with George Floyd. We saw that. We saw him as a human being, and everybody then was moved. That's what we call in our Rules for Dialogue, humanized. That's why it's such a great time for us to now talk, because we can begin to relate to each other as humans. And so that's what we've been able to do. So we got to begin connecting at that level. Let's not wait on the death for people to become human to us. Let's make them human now. And so we want to connect with other people. And then we think that connection is for one purpose, and that is so we can have some unity. I think unity of effort, we talk about it in the Marine Corps. If you split your forces, everybody knows what it means to say conquer and divide. If we can split our forces, we're half as strong. If we can unite and walk forward together, then we've doubled our effort, we've doubled our strength. And in a lot of cases, it's become more synergistic, and we've multiplied exponentially our power and our ability. So we've got to come together and we connect so that we can provide that unity, so that when we need solutions to problems, then we do that in a united way. Doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. Doesn't mean that at all. Wayne and I, man, we've been boys for a long time. We love disagreeing, and we love saying, hey, well, what about this? What about that? Because we know at the end of the day, we're taking the both, because I appreciate what he's got to offer. He appreciates what I have to offer, different backgrounds, and we come together and we say, okay, I got that. And we can march forward. And it doesn't mean we're always marching forward with the same amount of fervor about the solution, because we might think differently about it, but we can march forward because we know our unity is more important than anything else.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing, that we can actually go forward, because if you get that connection, you get that unity, we can go forward. History is very valuable, and we need to know history. I read so much history now. I didn't do this when I was in high school. When I was in college, I was a poor history student. I love history now because it gives you insight into the way that people thought then, and you can factor that into some of the solutions that we're coming up with today. So the value of history is that we can learn from it and live differently if necessary in the future. We can take the good, leave the bad and go forward. So history isn't meant to be lived in, it's to be learned from. And so that's the value of what we're doing here at Erase Race. Let's connect, let's unite, and let's go forward together. So those are my closing comments. Wayne, sum it up for us so we can get out of here for today.
No, I just, those 3 comments that you made right there, I experienced it the other day. Walked up the street, some neighbors who I've been knowing years. We've been neighbors for over 20 years. He's never been in my house. His wife never been in my house.
Wow.
I've been in their house once because they wanted to show me their new kitchen and everything. That was just a couple weeks ago. But we sat out in the street and we just discussed, how did we let so much time go by? Well, now, because of what happened to George Floyd and the other things they're seeing in the news, they admitted to me the other day that they have really been blind to a lot of stuff that's been going on in our country. And even though they were raised in the Bay Area, very liberal out here, not too far from here where they were raised. Of course, I was raised in San Francisco. Believe it or not, a lot of people out here have closed their minds to a lot of the stuff, that's a lot of the treatment that's been going on to a lot of people. So our point was we connected, and now we actually, and I introduced them to what we're doing here at Erase Race, and they're excited about being involved and helping. And our point is now we're going to move forward together, because I do believe, and I've been seeing it out here because I've been attending these protests, and I'm seeing a coalition of people. It's not just Black people. That's not white people. It's just not HB. It's a coalition of people who are saying enough is enough. Let's get rid of the hatred. Let's get rid of this. Not everybody's saying let's get rid of this race concept, but they're saying let's get rid of the hatred that goes along because of the race concept, and let's move forward as a people. Let's make a change. And so I'm excited about that. We're going to do it.
Okay, hey, want to send a shout out to a few more people. Melinda Aliff, Miss Aliff on the line. We got a question also. Someone said, how will you ensure the safety of the social worker responding to an already heated argument? And I think the issue is there that there's going to have to be, and I'm speaking up for the people who are in favor of maybe defunding the police and using social workers on their behalf. I think what they're saying is that you will need to, it's almost like triage. You'll have to decide, is this one that needs to be handled by a social worker, or should this one be subject to something akin to a police force? And so they're not saying, I don't think they're saying send social workers to all these heated arguments. I think they're saying that's going to have to be something that we're going to have to make a decision on. And that's why the devil is in the details of how this actually is going to come about and work. Because yeah, you don't really want a social worker showing up when you got a husband and a wife arguing and then weapons come into play or whatever. Yeah, social workers probably not equipped to handle that. And that's where you would need some police force. Wayne, you got any particular view on that?
No, 100%. I mean, if there's crime involved, and especially not just you were arguing or something like that, or, but if there's crime involved in it, some type of assault or something, we're still going to need police officers to deal with that situation. So, yeah, this is something that's going to have to be worked out. It's not an easy solution, not an easy answer.
Hey, well, also shout out to Mitzi and Curtis. They're down in Tampa. Those are my people there, some military people. By the way, I got a good blog about the Carlens and the Charlestons, which is based on Curtis and Mitzi, and how 2 families learn to share life together and care for life together. And so be looking for that out on our blog. Also, we've got our t-shirts out there. Still go out to our store and get some great merchandise out there. And also support us. We got a fundraiser going on because we're headed to the ATL, as we talked about earlier, to be part of a peaceful protest march that's coming up on Juneteenth. And we gave you the definitions on Juneteenth. So be a part of all that we're doing, because we believe that in America, that we're really all one human race, and you're a part of it. So thank you for sharing with us today on the Wayne Carlen Show.
Peace out.